Hey, what's up, gang? I'm here to show you all what I think the best decks post Banlist are. But not just that, I'm also going to show you all what beats them, or at least my opinion of it. So starting off, we've got AncientGarurumon. I think everyone still expects this to be a very dominant deck going into the current format, even though it was slightly hit on the ban list with some hits to like Louis, which they do play some copies of, some hits to Hammerspark, which they do play copies of, and then the hits to the promo Ukomon, which they do play 4 of, or at least used to play 4 of. So what are the pros of AncientGarurumon? I think that's really important to understand why a deck is seeing success, is to understand what it brings to the table that maybe other decks don't. Some of the pros are, 1, it's extremely fast. Starting from their turn 2, they can get out a level 6 that bounces when your lowest level, bounces top card security to hand, adds back a body from trash, and plays out a tamer for free. Pretty quick. It has bouncing removal, which is a very hard kind of removal to deal with, since there's a lot of cards that specifically want to be deleted, or decks that have deletion protection. It gets around a lot of those kind of things. Recursion, as I just mentioned, it adds back from trash with the AncientGarurumon itself. It can get tamers back from trash. It has the 2-cost option that can just add back the AncientGarurumon really easily. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of play around with the deck to get those bodies back. If you're playing blue base, you can also play the new no, you can't play the new Gabumon draws. My apologies. I was thinking that it was like the old, the new Agumon that adds back from trash. It's not that, but you still have the the option, and you also have the AncientGarurumon. It has consistency with insane draw power. If it's able to get out an AncientGarurumon and let it stick on the field, it'll draw 2 cards every turn, which is already rough. But also, the entire engine with its bottom end is kind of similar to Numemon in the fact that it doesn't need its rookies to like be Digivolution fodder, so the inherits of those rookies also don't matter. So they can play powerful rookies like Muchamon, Guilmon, and Ukomon that allow it to get really high value when it comes to the draw power. They also aren't specifically limited to a type of base like Numemon kind of was towards the latter half of its lifespan. So they're able to make use of things like purple and red, which have some, in my opinion, the best draw power in the game, allowing them to see a majority of their deck very quickly. It also doesn't really leave bodies in play, which I understand may be weird in the sense that, like, why I say pro. Having bodies on your opponent's field is sometimes really important for either tamers gaining you some amount of memory if your opponent has a Digimon, being able to delete something and then do something else, being able to have something to bounce. Like, even AncientGarurumon itself needs something to bounce in order to get that security effect to bounce that your top security to hand as well, unless they're able to draw a card of their own, which sometimes without enough memory is actually impossible for them to do. So not having any bodies in play a majority of the time whenever you're going into your opponent's turn can be really effective. Has access to a lot of varied option cards, from things like Crimson Blaze with red base to some purple option cards like Lament in the purple base version of the deck, or if you're playing enough mats, you can just play that anyways. Being able to play Heaven's Judgment. All of these are really difficult to deal with and powerful option cards that allow you to cheat certain aspects of playing a very aggro deck, because you have the ability to have utility where I think a lot of other more aggressive decks wouldn't. Has multiple ways to access, okay, chill. It has multiple ways to access its game plan. Not only just like hard playing the AncientGarurumon, but also being able to go like the option card to get the AncientGarurumon from trash and then crossing it for a total of 4 memory, which is crazy. That's a crazy way to do it. But then just having tamers as well, being able to go through that option in line. And if you're playing like things like blue base, you have the promo level that lets you cheat from your rookie itself, or even just digivolving up a line into the AncientGarurumon. All these are ways to kind of get access to said game plan, which is a very effective game plan, as we've seen so far. Now, on to the part 2, where I will typically, I think there's only one exception, talk about the cons of the list. So the cons of the AncientGarurumon. It was hit on the ban list, so even though it wasn't a necessarily big hit, it definitely still is a hit nonetheless. So we'll see how other decks that maybe were being slightly outsped by the amount of Ukomons flooding the field are able to capitalize on that. They're very piece reliant. I know it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It seems kind of dismissive to just say, oh, a deck is piece reliant, when it's like you need, like, every deck needs like level 3, level 4, level 5, level 6 majority of the time. When I say this deck is piece reliant, I mean it has to see Koji. It can definitely cause them some struggling. Weak to play cost reduction, and can't ignore requirement floodgates. Now, being weak to 2 floodgates is better than being weak to just 1 generically, because then your opponent has to play different kinds of floodgates to actually stop you from doing the multiple accesses of your game plan. But, say, against a black deck, they drop Gakuamon and they drop Jakurumon, well then I think you lose consistent access other than just hard dropping the AncientGarurumon for 12. It really does slow you down quite a bit. You need 2 memory and a Koji in play to actually be able to do the combo. Without access to 2 memory as a minimum, you won't be able to Digivolve on top of the Koji with the Kendo Garurumon, swing in, Digivolve on attacking into the Lobo, and then Digivolve using the Lobo effect into the Ancient. Without being able to do any of that, you actually can't get a swing off, and so you'll either just pass turn by doing the full combo without getting the extra check from the swing, or you'll have to try and set up a better way next turn, which is why I think the Ukamon hit can actually be devastating, because it's another way to kind of choke your opponent out, because now instead of just promoting Uko and getting that second memory that they needed, now they have to find another way to get it. Now, onto what my opinion is another one of the big 3. I think there are 3 best decks in the format. I think Ancient is an obvious one, and I think another one on everyone's radar is Imperial. I take a sip of water real quick. Now this is with and without the Magnamon X antibody. There are a lot of lists that are running around with like the more like armor-based bottom end that has seen, I think, a good amount of success, as well as Imperial Raw has seen a good amount of success. So I'm going to talk about them in the same vein for a majority of the time. They have all the same weaknesses. They just have some slightly different pros, which we'll go over in the next slide. So starting off, pros, Kennen Davis. I think we all can acknowledge the fact that I think Kennen Davis is probably the strongest tamer in the game right now. Being able to cheat out 3 memory every single turn is disgustingly strong, and it synergizes exceptionally well with this deck by giving it consistent search, as well as giving it access to just an attacker on their turn, without ever having a body on field, which is really strong. And why do I say they get an attacker? Because you can't attack with Digimon that you just played out. Well, DNA Evolution is actually the main gimmick of this deck. Being able to cheat out, say, 2 Kennen Davises, so that's 6 memory worth of Digimon, search the top 6, or even have those rookies be memory cheaters in some way. From 1 memory, your opponent can go into a Imperialdramon and not have to worry at all, which is super, super strong. I'm sure that doesn't need to be said. They can also not only go into a Imperialdramon for 1 memory and 0 bodies on field or in the back, but also gain memory off of that. They don't have to actually lose any memory throughout the course of that process, because they would do the Vmon that reduces play Digivolution cost, and then like maybe a Wormmon Searcher or a Vmon Searcher. It doesn't really matter too much there. But you would get out the Searcher Digimon there. You would then Digivolve on top of the Vmon for a reduced cost of 1, so for 1 memory. Then you would Digivolve on top of the Wormmon for 2. End of turn, using the Wormmon or Vmon Searcher effect to DNA Digivolve into Imperialdramon. Kennen Davis spend for 2 memory. That'll put you back to 0, and then depending on the level 4's unit of Digivolving into, you can gain upwards of 2 more memory, putting you at a net plus of 1 memory, while getting a level 5 that can swing, as well as draw, has jamming, has piercing, interacts with your board, you strip some of your opponent's stuff. It's just a lot of what it's actually able to do. So, you know, that's for sure a pro. As I mentioned before, huge amounts of searching. Majority of its rookies are searching through the deck quite quickly, but it also has a good amount of draw power as well, using the inheritables that some of the Vmons will be giving you. It's exceptionally fast. Starting from their turn 2, if they started with a Kennen Davis and a rookie in the back, they can end up with a Imperialdramon on field, doing 2 checks, getting some draws, interacting with your field, stripping some sources, maybe piercing through some of your Digimon that you ended up having on field already, and then ending on a Dragon mode, or just leaving the Imperial out while playing out more Tamers. Exceptionally good at that. Partition has great protection from non-battle removal. Being able to play out 2 level 4s, if your opponent plays, like, say, a Heaven's Judgment, I think that does it, but let's ignore Heaven's Judgment for a second, because I can't remember if DP reduction gets around Partition or not. I don't think it does, but I can't remember. So we'll instead do, like, Chaos Degrade. Your opponent Chaos Degrades you for 8. They'll put the Imperialdramon on top of their deck. They pass turn. Well, you still have 2 level 4s in play, as well as your Kenan Davises will then start proccing again. So you'll be able to get out more rookies, being able to go into a Imperialdramon with those rookies, but you also have 2 free level 4s in play that are attackers themselves that can also go straight into a new Imperialdramon. If your opponent ends up bouncing your Imperialdramon to hand, well, it doesn't matter because your level 4s are still in play. You can just immediately DNA Digivolve back into that Imperialdramon that was bounced to hand. It's exceptionally strong. Multi-checking. The deck can kill you, and then the Paladin mode Ace can check twice, but that's only in the pure version of Imperial. But in the Magna version of Imperial, you can still check twice using the Magna X, so they kind of even out there. Stripping. Being able to strip sources, such as key sources that allow you to get like huge value later on, like some Balmons, for example, in like DexDoruGoramon, or being able to strip out like aces from underneath your opponents, like strong level 5 aces, to try and steal turn or gain back some memory. It can be actually pretty devastating, even though I don't think decks care as much as they used to right now about their sources, or at least the ones that the top meta contention don't care as much. Extremely memory efficient. It's the most memory efficient deck in the format right now. I think it's only second without the Kenan Davis, but with the Kenan Davis, it by far outstrips, I think, every other deck, purely because of the fact that each of its level 4s will gain a memory. Some of their rookies can digivolve for cheaper. Their Kenan Davises will be cheating them out a minimum of 3 memory a turn if they play out a rookie, but even if you don't play out a rookie, you can still get a memory back on Evo, which is even more insane. And then Primogenesis. It actually answers a lot of the weaknesses that the deck had to battle removal specifically. Purely because of the fact that if you would be deleted, you can instead just digivolve into another Digimon of yours, be it like the Dragon mode, the Imperialdramon Fighter mode, or the Paladin mode, which will in turn stop the deletion from happening, and then allowing you to do that on your opponent's turn is exceptionally strong. But Primogenesis also has another use that lets you digivolve into one of your Digimon into a free type Digimon for a cost of 2, or I'm not sure if it actually is a free type Digimon specifically, but it does work with Magna X, so it is another way to kind of cheat out Magna X without having to rely on Memory of the Golden Knight, which is a 3-cost option that I think is worse in every way. It costs more, and the secondary effect is worse, in my opinion, than Primogenesis. So there's that as well. Now on to the cons. Oh, my bad, not cons. These are still the pros, but this is the pros of specifically just pure. So they're able to bot deck your opponent's stuff using the Imperialdramon Imperialdramon Fighter mode aces, and just Fighter mode in general, which is really strong. Great way of removal. As well as it's very ace resistant using the Dragon mode. There's no ace shenanigans that can typically affect the deck, purely because of the fact that if you swing the Dragon mode and your opponent decides to ace you, you can actually get your Evo off first, and then make them overflow and punish them for going into an ace. In the pros of Magna X version, you get you're slightly ace resistant. You're not nearly as ace resistant as the Dragon mode is, but you're typically immune, ideally when you're swinging, so that will make you ace resistant at least. And you're not always immune though, so that can sometimes be an issue. Speaking of immune, you're also an immune blocker that is typically pretty large, that most decks will have a hard time getting around. Now onto the cons. Large raid attackers are actually quite scary for this deck. Having your opponent swing in with like a 20k body will typically just lead you to be deleted no matter what version you're playing if you don't have a Primogenesis out. Any battle deletion whatsoever is also just scary for the deck. Partition, it just isn't affected, doesn't work if you get deleted by battle. Tamer removal is devastating against the deck. If your opponent pays 4 memory for a Ken Davis turn 1 with a rookie in the back, even just playing out like a 7-cost Grand Kawagamon is just backbreaking. Because now you have a level 6 in play for 3 memory on your turn 1 without actually having to commit much resources, compared to them only having a rookie now. It's extremely piece reliant, very similarly to AncientGarurumon. The benefit compared to AncientGarurumon though is that you have a lot more copies of the cards that you need to see, such as Imperialdramon. But even then, you need to see more of individual copies than AncientGarurumon does, because if you want to do the full combo with Ancient, you need 3 cards specifically. With Imperialdramon, you need a rookie, another rookie. Typically, not all the times, you don't need 2 rookies. Typically, you'll have 1 rookie. 2 level 4s, 1 blue, 1 green, and then a Imperialdramon, which already bumps you up to 4. The rookie you want is the one that lets you DNA at the end of your turn, because typically you'll be passing turn whenever you're doing the combo itself. And then ideally as well, you have like a level 6 to go into like Dragon mode as a means of protection. Memory blockers can really hurt. One of the ways you keep turn is the fact that your level 4s will be gaining you memory. So the fact that a memory blocker just stops you from doing so, and that leads you to pass turn, can stop you from actually getting a lot of early game aggression in, which can be really devastating. Play by effect floodgates slow the deck down. Having a play by effect floodgate out, so like a Imperialdramon or something, prevents your opponent from actually getting any benefit out of their Kenan Davises. They're pretty outable comparatively to the memory blocker floodgates, purely because the memory blocker floodgates will last a turn and then you'll have to kill them on the crackback typically. Whereas play by effect floodgates, if you're going through the combo, even like without like getting your play by effect stuff, you'll be able to answer that floodgate that turn. But it's still pretty good at slowing the deck down nonetheless. With a level 4 in Raising, they need a minimum of 2 memory, excluding no Kenan Davis, obviously. The reason for that is because you need a level 4 in Raising. You promote it. It has the end of turn DNA Digivolve at the end of your turn. And then you just hard play out, let's say like a Stingmon for 3 or for 4. You then put your opponent to 2 or 1, depending on which one. And then if it's the 3-cost Stingmon or the 4-cost one of the other level 4s, you'll gain a memory back or 2 memory back, depending on what the other level 4s are, which will then let you keep turn, because you'll end of turn DNA straight into a Imperialdramon. But any memory less than that without a Kenan Davis is impossible to do that exact play. So you'll need to either adjust and like search a little bit more, or find some ways to like cheat out some memory. DP reduction hurts the deck for sure, purely because of the fact that it gets around like the immunization of the Magnet X and stuff. And that's, I think, it for Imperial. Going on to I think the third bit of like the big 3. Note that these are not in any particular order. In fact, I think personally DexDoru is the strongest of the big 3, but I think the other 2 are nothing to laugh at, and I think it is extremely close depending on the player. So pros of DexDoru. Well, it's got insane cycle. A majority of its cards are constantly cycling. So like the DexDorus are drawing 1 and trashing 1 on Evo. The Dorugas are also doing that. Just being able to use like the Fenrir stuff to continuously just draw and go through. But also the Dex play, Dex, D-E-C-K-S, not D-E-X. Okay, there we go. The players that play the Dex, I'm just gonna cry, play these cards, typically have like memory, the options that cheat out memory, like the memory trainings, the purple trainings, the 3-cost option that lets them play from hand or trash for reduced cost, that also searches them. Analog use, they have, I think those are like the main ways they're typically cycling in the deck, which is exceptionally strong. They're also the most memory efficient deck, excluding Kenan Davis, purely because of the fact that their Lugamons let them cheat out their Tamers, their Tamers let them cheat out memory, their Inheritables let them cheat out memory, allowing them to do like weird plays like playing out their Tamer from underneath themselves to keep turn by gaining a memory off their Inherits. They have ways to cheat a majority of their evolutions as well, by just being very interactive with your board. It's super difficult to actually choke them even at 1 memory. They have exceptionally strong taunting effects. Taunting is insanely strong, which is one of the reasons why the Etamon card from, I think, EX5 was so powerful, is because it is a level 5 body that is black and yellow, giving it access to a majority of the exceptionally strong aces that also taunts an opponent's Digimon. Well, this deck has that in archetype, and the only requirement is that you have a Tamer underneath it, which you will almost always be attempting to do at least, and you'll almost always have access to. So it's very easy to actually get the benefits of taunting. And while you don't play aces in it, the deck itself gets a lot of benefit from your opponent swinging in and then you blocking. It has access to Alliance, which allows you not only to have extremely huge bodies because of making use of your other Digimon, but also allowing you to make use of the security attack going into it. So getting a healthy amount of checks in, allowing you to get like secret lethals when your opponent probably wasn't expecting you to be able to do so. Tamer removal in archetype with the DexDoruGoramon. They're level 6. Just on play, deleting a Tamer is really strong. It's really, really good. I mentioned earlier with memory efficiency, but there are a lot of free evos, and I think free evos stand out enough that it should be mentioned again. This deck rewards extremely high skill and knowledge. The more time and effort you put into this deck and understanding the format that it's in, this deck will reward you more and more. It is, I think, probably the highest skill ceiling of all the big 3 available to you, with what you're actually able to do and what you're actually able to kind of understand going forward after playing the deck a lot. Again, mentioned with the Alliance, you have access to extremely large bodies, making it so that way you can swing over, I think, a majority of things pretty consistently. You can play out a lot of bodies for cheap as well. Being able to delete a Digimon with Dorugora allows you to just immediately cheat out one of your level 4 or lower Digimon, I believe, or one of your Tamers out from trash as well, which is super nice, especially when it comes to things like Alliance. You can choke from turn 1. You have a lot of 2-cost cards that just immediately allow you to like start choking your opponent consistently if you're going second, but you also have access to things like the promo Uko, which I didn't mention prior because I feel like a majority of decks are going to have access to not the promo Uko, the BT17 Ukomon, the one that evos for 1. I'm mentioning it here though because it synergizes so well with the fact that majority of the deck, all of its searching of power comes from really cheap cards that kind of force your opponent to end on like 1 to 2 memory. Has deletion protection. Depending what is in their trash, their level 4s, 5s, and 6s all have ways to protect themselves from being deleted through battle or by effect, it doesn't matter. They have the best recursion of the big 3. The typical egg that you run in the slot is the new Baumon, that whenever a Tamer ends up sliding underneath, you can digivolve into one of your Digimon from trash, which is really strong because once you get all your pieces in trash, you can kind of just start activating that Digimon over and over and over again throughout the course of the turns, and that will be pretty devastating, I think, for any deck that really wants to grind you out. No major floodgates really affect the deck. Like a memory blocker can like stop it from gaining like 1 or 2 memory. Play by effect can stop it from like, getting out like an extra body or 2. Reduce play cost doesn't really do anything. Ignore EVA requirements doesn't do anything. Like every major floodgate that people would typically be playing doesn't really hit the deck in a meaningful way. Collision is a really strong effect, forcing your opponent to not only trigger a lot of your bonus effects, but also killing bodies that weren't suspended, forcing them to swing to block you, even without having blocker. Having access to the Digivolution can be devastating into a lot of decks in the format, as well as like if your opponent swings in with an AncientGarurumon, and they can't end up bouncing your strong level 6, just having a blocker that on deletion digivolves straight into the X that then de-digivolves the Anga if it would have gotten deleted, like protecting you there is really strong because then it also stops them from actually getting their Anga effect, which allows them to play out a Tamer from trash and get back resources from their trash as well. Moving on to the cons, however, it's really, really weak to non-deletion removal, which is scary considering the fact that a majority of the stronger decks in this format have access to non-deletion removal. So that's something you have to kind of understand, work around, and play around. Like for Anga, you have to have extra buys and fields, so that way your main stack doesn't actually get bounced, or with Imperial, like trying to play around their fighter mode as much as you can. You need bodies on field for maximum value. And what I mean by that isn't you need bodies on your field, it's that you need bodies on your opponent's field, which is really rough. Again, say Anga, having nothing on field, you can't make something swing into you to get a free Evo off of it. And so if you end up pushing out your level 4, doing everything going into your level 5, and your level 5 says whenever attack target is redirected, you're completely fine, well, you can't force anything on their field to swing. They go straight into an Anga, they bounce your level 5, they get their whole shenanigans going, and you're immediately on the back foot. Trash Disruption can really hurt because of the fact that the ratios of this deck are a little wonky, typically because of how accessible the trash is to you. You don't play that many of certain copies of your cards. So like if you end up bottom decking one of your Dex cards, like your DexDoruGoramon, your DexDoruGoramon, or your DexDoruGoramon. I don't remember the level 4's name. That can get rid of a lot of your protection. Or even just get rid of like a level 4, level 5, or level 6 in trash can stop your opponent from being able to use the Balmon effect to Digivolve into it. You can brick because of these ratios. As I mentioned before, you only play 6 level 5s, 4 of the DoruGoramon, and then 2 of the Dex versions of it. Without your level 5, you have no real access to any of your powerful level 6 effects, like your Tamer Disruption, like your Digis, like your Board Wipes, things like that. And so it's really important to find each and at least one of every single one of your levels and protections. And upon doing so, you're really set. But prior to doing so, you can kind of just be stuck on a level 4 after searching like the top like 20 cards of your deck and still not seeing a level 5. It'd be just completely SOL. Has an extremely high skill ceiling, but also has an extremely high skill floor. This deck requires just, I think, a lot of pre-planning and understanding of what cards you want in your trash, what cards you need in your hand at any given point, as well as understanding when you can Digivolve from your trash and take resources out of there that you'd really want to keep in there sometimes, or even when to actually seek for your protection, when to swing in and use collision, or when it's better to force your opponent to swing into you instead. It also has the most matchup knowledge requirement of the big 3. And this doesn't apply just to the big 3 in my mind, like for Imperial and Anga. Like, while those matchups are important to understand, I also mean this for like every single deck, be it like a Galaxy Loop deck, be it like a Royal Knight deck, be it like Ragnarlord. You kind of had to understand a little bit of what your opponent is trying to do and the best way that you can choose to interact with them, because you have a lot of angles of which to attack, but if you choose the wrong angle, it's going to be very ineffective, or at least it won't be as effective as just playing something like AncientGarurumon or playing something like Imperial, which are a bit more one note in the way that they tend to interact with the board comparatively to DexDoruGoramon. If you have no extra bodies, it actually takes you a long time to start killing your opponent. The fastest that you can really do is if you end up deleting your opponent's stuff, but they don't have, they're preventing you from playing out an extra body using the DoruGoramon effect. You'll just end up swinging in for like 2 checks a turn, and if you don't end up deleting anything, which is even worse, you're only getting in for a single check a turn typically without any extra bodies. Alliance, you really need those extra bodies to feel safe when it comes to swinging. Collision, it's a huge upside, but also if you're completely set up, at a certain point, your opponent can just make use of the fact that you're giving their Digimon blocker and start colliding with you, which has come up a couple times where I've been in testing and my opponent just can't kill me because of the fact that they have a DoruGoramon. They have done all their effects for the turn, but I still have bodies on field, and if they swing, those end up deleting a body, but then nothing else happens from that. Their Digimon is still suspended going into the next turn, and I can like potentially delete it via battle if they don't have a DexDoruGoramon in the trash, or even just finding some other way to remove it. So what are the takeaways? What did we learn after looking at all these decks? Well, speed is king. Speed is king, has been king, and will continue to stay king. If your deck wins on turn 80, and it wins every time on turn 80, and there's something your opponent can do, it doesn't matter what your opponent's deck is, it doesn't matter how they play, by turn 80, you're winning the game every single time. That's really cool. But the problem is that you're winning by turn 80, whereas most decks are trying to win much sooner than that, are interacting with you on such diverse axes that just trying to go for like a slow, long game removal like plan can be really detrimental against a lot of decks that are trying to cheat you in different ways by either protecting themselves from deletion, getting value off of getting deleted, protecting themselves from getting removed in general, or even just kind of cheating out your life. Looking at you security, Secon, like, I think Secon has a lot of teeth right now in the meta, but the problem is that Anga, if they're able to just continuously get enough memory to proc Anga effect on their own, they can really just kind of outcycle you and remove enough security to start becoming an actual threat. Tamer hate is really in right now. A lot of the decks have Tamers they really want to stay alive. Like, for example, Cannon Davis, I think, is one of the most optimal removal targets in the entire game. Other huge removal targets are the Kojis that you really need to get rid of to make sure your opponent can't just cheat out an AncientGarurumon on the crackback every single time, as well as then finally being able to delete some of the Cracker Fangs and AGs that your opponent plays out. Though with the DexDorus, they're actually able to play around tamer removal to some extent by keeping their tamers underneath their bodies, which then are also protected from traditional deletion. So understanding what their opponent is on and being able to again adjust is really important. Battle and non-deletion removal though are super good into different parts of the meta. Battle deletion is really good into Imperial, and then typical non-deletion removal is really good into the other two kinds of decks, being AncientGaruru and DexDoru. Floodgates are in a great and a awful spot right now. And what I mean by that is that there are some cards and some decks in the format that just auto-lose, or at least are extremely hampered by different kinds of floodgates. But the problem is that a majority of decks are either resistant to them in some way, or they are weak to different kinds of floodgates, meaning that sometimes you'll add in some Pillamon and your opponent will not care whatsoever. And same thing will go for like the memory blockers and the can't reduce play cost Digimon of the world. So even though there are a lot of decks that are generally hit by them, there are a lot of decks that just don't care about them as well, which I think is the best spot for floodgates in my opinion. I think that floodgates are unfun when they're so game determinative. So having them in a spot where it's like, well, you can play this to increase your matchup against X deck, but they're bricks in the other matchups that you'll probably be finding yourself in. Decks that don't leave body or are immune/resistant to removal are very happy right now. Having a deck that you typically end your turn with no bodies on field is eating good, because your opponent really needs these bodies to make maximum use of what's going on. Comparatively to, I think, a lot of other decks in the format that want to kind of just have bodies on field that hopefully stick, they're not going to stick, unfortunately. Other decks that are just really resistant to a lot of different kinds of removal or even really immune are really happy. That's why I think a lot of people are really looking at decks like Magna right now, and looking at decks like the Bug deck with Tyrant as potential counters to what's going on in the meta, because of the fact that if you swing, you taunt Tyrant, okay, I swing in, it's now immune to your Digimon effect. It doesn't matter that you attempt to Digivolve me, and because of the fact that I'm now suspended, I get a huge buff to my DP, which will then hopefully trigger your stuff, so that way I can then start playing again without having to worry about you doing some weird shenanigans. Decks that go super wide will typically still have a portion of their board that they developed on the crackback. Obviously there are some notable exceptions like Crimson Blaze, but if you end your turn on 8 rookies, I'm gonna say probably 6 of them are gonna come back to you against almost every single matchup that I've listed so far from the big 3. Enga will typically bounce 1, maybe get rid of 2 or 3. Imperial will get rid of 2 or 3, and DexDoru will get rid of 2 or 3. Typically you'll end up with a large wide board. There's only one of the big 3 that has a board wipe, and it requires them to go into their Dex version of their level 6 in order to delete all of your lowest level. So here are my suggestions. Decks that I think survive, or at least have some kind of game plan against the top decks, and are able to ideally deal with at least 2 or 3, if not all 3. Starting off, Numemon. I think Numemon is still a good deck. I don't know if it's the best deck in the format, but the kind of floodgates that you're able to play, you are able to play 3 different kinds of floodgates because of just black having access to the Bakuamon, Chumon, and Jakuremon, so it allows you to kind of adjust from there. And because of the fact that you don't really need your level 3s like some other decks in the format, it doesn't actually hurt you as much to be playing them. You're also still very memory efficient. You typically put your opponent to 3 in turn 1, and then since past that point, you're kind of thriving. I think Numemon is in a very weird spot right now because of the lack of Nume X, and it requires, I think, deck builders to either say, hey, sometimes we find the one of Nume X, and sometimes we're just really weak to removal, and that's okay. I think that's sad, though. I think that Numemon has a lot of teeth, with Monze X still being a thing, and I think that trying to find a different playstyle for the deck may be more optimal. But nonetheless, I still think the Numemon deck as a whole Still has some teeth. I just don't think it's as a tiered like one deck anymore. It's for sure fallen from grace. Dark Masters. I think the Dark Masters lists are really, really strong. And I'm not talking Omnimon variants of the list. I think Omnimon variants of the list are a lot weaker now compared to the Ace versions of the list, not only because of the fact that we have so many different kinds of aces to have access to, but also because sticking bodies on field is a lot harder when you're only playing out 1 to 2 bodies a turn. So I think you need to make those bodies count a lot more. Some cons, though, is the fact that you're giving your opponents a huge amount of memory. And with how memory efficient your opponents are these days, being Imperial, Inga, and Dex, you are really having a hard time dealing with them. But on the plus side, you do have consistent access to Tamer removal, consistent access to non-deletion removal. You have access to milling, which can mill crucial pieces of your opponent's stuff. You have access to some insane recursion. There's not a single deck in the format right now that will be able to out-recur you unless you just get unlucky. There's nothing that can happen, I think, in a long game that your opponent can beat you. So the only problem with the deck is the speed aspect, which even to that extent, you can still kind of mitigate, again, using aces. However, each of the big three have some way to kind of hamper you. Anga bouncing your level 5s, preventing you from going into aces. Imperial stripping your guys, potentially stripping out aces from underneath your level 7s. And then also bottom decking your cards is really devastating. And then DexDoru actually just causing you to swing in with those aces that you got on their turn to then make use of them on their turn to gain also basically a turn skip for you, which is really rough. Demon Lords and Royal Knights. I think these decks are extremely overtuned. They're very, very strong. Even Royal Knights, which people have kind of been sleeping on since BT17, has fallen out of a lot of favor. I think the major reason for that is purely because of the fact that Jakuri and Psychmon exist as cards, and they completely destroy a majority of the playstyle that exists for these two decks. However, again, Floodgates aren't really in a great spot right now. Of the big three, only one deck kind of cares about Jakurumon and Psychmon, and that's only paired with a Kakuamon, which only Black has access to. So, when looking at it like that, what do these decks bring to the table? Well, they have deletion and non-deletion removal. They have an inevitability win con that says, by turn 6, if you haven't killed me yet, I will typically be killing you. They're resistant to removal in different ways. Like, for example, Demon Lords is able to still get value even with something bouncing you to hand, and has access to the level 5 Lucimon fall down mode, or chaos mode I mean, which is exceptionally strong in stopping your opponent from doing anything. And then Royal Knights have access to things like Craniumon, which is just a completely immune blocker and requires your opponent to beat over it comparatively, and then will also disrupt their board at the end of their turn. I think both these decks are sleeper picks right now and are things that really should be picked up. Galaxy combo. With the loop, I call it Dusk and Dawn, by the way, as a heads up. If it's with the loop, it's Galaxy combo and not just Galaxy loop pure, it's Dusk and Dawn. Alright, keep that in mind. Whenever you're talking to people and you're like, oh, Dusk and Dawn is doing really good right now, it's Galaxy combo with the loop, alright? It's not just Galaxy loop. We're not heathens out here. We need cooler names than just like Galaxy loop, okay? We need Dusk and Dawn. That's sick. That's sick. That's cool. It rolls off the tongue, and it's a reference to the video games, which is important. We can't remember where we came. You have to remember where we came from, boys. Okay? Gotta remember where we came from. These two variants of the deck, I don't think, just as a quick clarification as well, I don't think Galaxy combo without the loop is really good right now, just because a lot of decks have really strong access to removal. So, you know, just ending on Mirage isn't that great. But with Galaxy combo and with the loop, Dusk and Dawn, and Galaxy loop, having access to an inevitability win con with the Tamer setup, allowing you to just set typically like by turn 4 or turn 5, if your opponent hasn't really been interacting with you, a Mirage and then a level 3 that will then just continuously steal turn from them as long as you're playing it properly, is really strong. Mirage is a house. Stopping your opponent from searching is really, really good again, as well as it provides some level of aggression. And there's actually a good amount of combo potential if you're playing the combo version of the list, with like the red egg allowing you to just like cheat into a Mirage on turn 2 really easily, or with the blue egg allowing you to go Apollomon after playing out the red Coincide Tamer, swing in for 2 to 3 checks, and then activating the Coincide Tamer on play effect to then de-digivolve that into a Mirage to then gain some amount of memory, as well as bounce top card security to hand or bounce a body to hand, which is, again, really good. You do all of that typically for around 8 memory, and then you gain some of that back off of the Mirage effect. The downsides of this deck, though, are pretty numerable. One, sometimes you just don't see a Mirage. It's the only non-searchable card in the deck, but it's also, I think, the most important piece in both of these variants of the deck, as well as the fact that it probably will get banned at some point. Konami has already, not Konami, sorry, Yu-Gi-Oh! Bandai has already shown that they dislike these kind of decks that try to steal your opponent's turn without allowing them to actually have any interaction. So you can probably expect this to get hit sooner rather than later. So keep that in mind. However, I think these are the 4 best non-big 3 options to be looking at when going into the current meta. They all hit certain niches that allow you to deal with your opponent in ways that I think will hurt them the most. Now, of course, we cannot forget one of the most important things left to do. Please leave a like, subscribe, show your support, etc., etc. I'd really appreciate it. And I love you guys.